just realised that I'm a Fairman quine. I come frae the countryside, nae near the sea, and you'll just realise fu ironic it is when I start to tell my stories, actually. I've picked more than a story. I've picked 3 stories because I'm greedy, but also because I want you to ging to the Kist and hae a listen, because there's many bra stories and songs in all languages. So div hae a wee listen. And the ains I've picked come frae Banavi Primary School. Banavi, drat, I can't get it wrong. Banavi Primary School, Mrs. K. Jemison, Stanley Robertson and Betsy White. So I hope I do them justice. Awa hiney back, you would have heard tales o' this craters a' round the coast of Scotland. Fae the west coast, richt up to Orkney, doon round Aberdeenshire, doon to Angus, there would have been tales o' these bonny creatures. But I hanna heard ony fishermen come up with new tales, and it gars me wonder if maybe their getting is extinct, or close to it, is the flapper skate or the Atlantic halibut. And that's why I decided to choose 3 stories to gar you think and mine about mermaids. Because I want Scottish mermaid stories to survive into the future. I don't want them to ging extinct.
One Friday morn as we sat sail on the ship not far from the land, we heard the spy a fair pretty maid, with a comb and a glass in her hand, with a comb and a glass in her hand.
A boat was coming in to the harbour when he spied her. He thought he'd seen her afore, or maybe he knew her ken, but he couldn't be sure because she'd louped into the water as fast. And when he speered at the other farmers, at the other fishermen, they says, leave weel alone, loon. Dinna ging meddling wi' mermaids. But there she was, on this great muckle steen, combing her hair, nae trying to get a wa of her. And when the lad looked closer, he could see that she was hurted. She had a muckle gash down her sloch, and his heart went out to her. He couldn't leave her there. He would hate to gie her a hand. Well, in spite of the outcry for the other fishermen, he went and he got the mermaid and he took her on a boat and he ta'en her home and looked after her. As he was tending to her wound, a sloch come off. And aneath thon tail, she had 2 legs like ony other quine. Well, a 2 of them got real fond o' one another. And as time goodbye, wedding bells were heard. And as mair time goodbye, they had 1, 2, 3 bairns. They were happy together. There was times when a mermaid would look wistful out to the water. But syne she would hear her bairnies laughing and look at her man, her handsome man, and she would smile. A mermaid and a fisherman were blithe together. They looed in another. Well, a day, her man was out at the fishing, and she got down to the boathouse to get a net that needed mending. And as she was raking about, she come upon her sloch. She couldn't believe it. Fit a surprise she got. She thought her man would have got rid of it. But there it was, her bonny tail. And when she seen it, something louped in her heart. She couldn't help herself. She got down to the water's edge and she put on the sloch. And awa she went. Well, her man was hurt sair. He couldn't live without her. They say that he went down to the edge of the water and he cried out across the bay to his wife, and she would cry back again. They would spend hours gollering back and forth to one another. But try as he might, he could never trace her back onto the land. Well, they say this get on for years and years. And that time, the all fishermen were saying, we telled him nae gweed would come out. He should have listened to us. Aye, but they sung to each other and they shouted across the bay to one another. But the fisherman, he was getting mair and mair doon in the moo. And at last he could ston it nae longer. So he gaed to his mither and he says, Mither, would you look after the bairns? And she said, fairly that, loon, I can easy do that, but will you nae miss him? Would you nae rather hae their company at hame? And he shook his head. He said, they canna come for I'm gone, mither. Well, nae doot. She was real worried. Nae doot she pleaded with him to bide with her and the bairns, and things would get better come time. In the hinner end, Athen gets better with time. I bet she worried herself sick elky time he got out in the boat. But fit could she do? He was a grown man, and she couldn't be with him all hours of the day. They say he got down to the water's edge, and he shouted out for his wife. And fin she replied, he louped into the water with a muckle smile on his face, and he swam recht towards her. Recht out of sight. His body was never found. Some folk think it a mermaid saved him. Others folk think that he drowned. But if it ever happened, he couldn't live without her, and she couldn't come back onto dry land. So maybe thon all fishermen were recht, and nae gweed could come o' sic a match. But if you ging to that bay and listen to the twa of them gollering blithely back and forth, you micht just disagree. Fisherman was catching rockfish just off the coast of Orkney, like he did elky day. But this day he'd gone farther down the coast than he'd ever gone afore, and he come to this deep water cove, and there, sitting on a muckle stein, was a mermaid, combing her hair. She was bonny, salmon pink, her skin glistened in the sunshine, like sequins, and her sea green hair flowed recht down her breast all the way to her tail. She looked a bit odd compared to most folk, but he was fair smitten with her. He started to row towards her. The mermaid louped into the water in a wa. Well, elky day after that, he got up and down the coast looking for the mermaid, and whiles he did see her, but he could never get that close. He tell't his pal, he says, I would gie my heart and soul if I could marry her. I ken she's a mermaid, but she's awfu' bonny, And I just went to be close to her. I just went to be with her all the time. Well, it wasn't long after that he stopped fishing altogether. He got up and down the coast searching for his green-eyed beauty. He got across the cliffs and over the sand and climbing out over the rocks. He looked away. He was fair besotted, he was. Never saw her. But a day, as he was coming home over the cliffs, he looked down and he seen something he'd never seen afore. Down as gully and atween the rocks, there seemed to be a pathy that wound its way recht aneath the ground to a cavern, a great muckle cavern. And when the high tide was in, nae doubt it was full wi' water. But if no, it was more like a lagoon. There was a ledge of steam all the way round this bonny pool. And sitting on that ledge was a hell hillock of merfolk. And recht in the middle was the love of his life. Well, he was going to get her this time. So he started doing the pathy, canny as you like, so he wouldn't be seen. And when he come to the edge of the cavern, he slipped into the water and started swimming towards the mermaid. He ignored that niggle at the back of his head that said, "This is nae like a good plan. Fit if a tide comes in, fit you'll be drowned." All he could think about was a mermaid. And he was getting closer and closer and closer. And he could see her clearer and clearer than he'd ever seen her afore. And now he could see that thon bonny sea green hair was nothing more than a tongue of seaweed. And thon bonny pink skin was covered in scales. Thick, muckle scales, fleshy like a haddock. And her teeth, thon chowdlers, they were long, sharp, serrated shards like sharks. It dawned on the fisherman that she was more fish than woman. Well, just at that point, the mermaid spotted him. And she cried on the other merfolk, and they all loped into the water and headed towards the fisherman. And he realised there was more to be feared of than the tide. So he turned tail and started swimming for his life. Somehow, he managed to get back to the ledge just as a green-haired creature grabbed him. He could feel her scaly hand round his queets, but he kicked her off and ran up a pathy. He was never so glad to see daylight. He never ventured back. He'd gone clean off mermaids. Fitty was walking across the sand, heading for his boat. He was gone out to check his creels. Van Aartiens, he heard this queer kind of sound. He looked up at the cliffs and he thought, is this scurries? No, it wasn't the birds. Maybe it was some beast out in the bay. And he had a good look, but it was nothing there. It'll be some bairns guddling about in the water, down at the rock pools. They'll just be laughing and having a grand time. But then he listened again, and there was this great skirl. Somebody had hurt themselves. He was sure o't. So he run the hell length of the beach, recht to the rock pools to see fit Pierre Byrne had an accident. But when he reached Lon Steens, he couldn't believe it. His heart started thumping, his throat got dry, the very hairs in the back of his head rose up, for there, sitting on a rock, was a mermaid. Well, Fitty was awa to turn and leave recht awa, because he was a fisherman. He kent fit mermaids could do, and he wasn't going to take any chances. But Fitty looked, the poor quine, she was great and sair, there was tears running down her cheeks. He couldn't just leave her. She didn't look all that dangerous ava. So he couldn't help himself. Fitty, she quine, can I give you a hand? Well, if a fisherman had gotten a flag, I'll tell you, the mermaid got twice as mickle of a scare she did. And she nearly louped into the water, for she had heard that fishermen could do to mermaids. But she looked in his een, and she thought, he doesn't look coarse. I think I could trust him. And she couldn't stop herself. She says, I've tint my comb. I've lost my comb somewhere, I can far it is, and my hair's a sauce. I'm having a recht bad hair day. In the night, there's a Kelly, and Abdi's coming. I really went to gink, but I'm gonna go looking like this, and I can for my comb is what have I got to do? Well, Fitty had daughters with his ain, and he kent how important it was to make a good impression when you ging to a Kelly. So he said he would ging and see if he could find her comb. And he got up and down the beach. He rake it here and he rake it there, but he could find nae sicht nor sign o't. But he did come upon a fish bean. And he thought, it might do. So he picked it up and he ta'en it back to the one mermaid. And he raxed out to hand it till her. And she smiled. She ta'en the one fish bean and she started to comb her hair. And she says, foo can I ever thank you? That was real kind, that was. I'll tell you, Fit, I'll grant you a wish. Well, Fitty had a think to himself. And he thought, I dinna want oor muckle siller. Nae gweed comes o hae an oor muckle siller. But I never went to be a thoot, because that's nae fun either. I went to hae just a neuch siller, so I can feed my bairns and put clays on their back. So he speered the mermaid. He says, could I hae just a neuch to see my arma days? And she smiled and said, nae bother ava. And I'll do the same for your bairns and your bairns' bairns. And say it is that Fitty's great-great-granddaughter told that story way back in 1953, and she said it was a true story, and I believe her. And now I've told you my tales o' Scottish mermaids, and you can ging to the Kist and find a hell hantle mair. I had enough a job honing it down to just 3. But please, your job is to pass them on, because we canna let these Scottish mermaid stories ging extinct. Thank you very much for listening.